Hello, and thank you for coming to this lecture, Reclaiming the City, the Renaissance of Temple Bar. My name is Merlo Kelly. I'm a conservation architect with Lutz Architecture, and I'm a design fellow in UCD. So this talk draws from research carried out for a number of case studies I've been commissioned to write for volume 3 of More Than Concrete Blocks. And I will touch very briefly on 3 projects in Temple Bar during my talk. The first is the Irish Film Centre, now the IFI, designed by O'Donnell and Toomey and completed in 1992. The second is the Printworks, designed by Derek Tynan Architects and completed in 1994. And the third is Meeting House Square, designed by Paul Keogh Architects and completed in 1996. During the research process, I carried out interviews with Sheila O'Donnell and John Toomey of O'Donnell and Toomey, Derek Tynan of Derek Tynan Architects, and Paul Keogh of Paul Keogh Architects. And just some credits to note. Archive material was supplied by the architects mentioned and sourced in the Group 91 archive in the Irish Architectural Archive, and that's drawings, photographs, minutes, etc. And recent photography of the projects is by Paul Tierney, whose photographs will be published in volume 3. So in this talk, my primary focus really is the work of Group 91 in an overall sense, and a focus on the Temple Bar Framework Plan from 1991. And it's 30 years on from that plan, which is of interest as well. So this talk and the project are organised by Dublin City Council Heritage Office, and there's a link there for the copies of More Than Concrete Blocks. So to begin, to give a bit of context, the 1991 Temple Bar Framework competition was a response to the increasing threat to the area posed by the proposal for a transportation hub for CIE spanning across Ormond Quay, Wellington Quay, and many of the historic streets in this quarter between the Liffey and Dame Street. And this is the area in yellow highlighted here in 18th century map, which is overlaid by Group 91. So on Taschke's 1985 report, The Temple Bar Area, A Policy for Its Future, highlighted growing concerns and called for urgent action. Interestingly, this report was reputedly the first reference to the Temple Bar area, which was a name borrowed from the historic street running parallel to the river. The scheme for the colossal transportation hub was designed by an American firm, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And CIE had acquired numerous properties in the vicinity to ensure its completion. Short leases were issued in many of the properties in this area as they were earmarked for demolition in preparation for this transportation hub. The plight of Temple Bar, which had been dubbed Dublin's Latin Quarter, attracted political attention and gained traction in the press, and slowly attitudes began to shift. So eventually, public outcry and economic constraints meant that plans for the transport depot were eventually abandoned in 1987. It's said that Taoiseach Charles Haughey saw Temple Bar as his grand projet, thus focused his attentions on the area. Temple Bar Properties was established following the Temple Bar Renewal and Development Act in 1991. And critically, funding was obtained from the European Regional Development Fund. And so a competition was announced to develop an architectural framework plan for Temple Bar. So 12 practices were invited to enter the competition, and Group 91 submitted the winning entry. And Group 91 are pictured here. So Group 91 was made up of 13 architects from 8 small architectural practices who came together to form a consortium in 1991 when Dublin was designated European City of Culture. So professionally, many of the Group 91 collective were already collaborating in the 1980s, and many of them were involved in the city architecture studio practice. Several architects in the group had returned home, having gained experience working abroad following graduation. So in addition to a series of projects examining the quays and the docklands, they staged a number of architectural exhibitions in the Blue Studio Architecture Gallery at 42 Dawson Street, formerly the offices of de Blackham and Marr architects. So fundamental to the principles of the City Architecture Studio was an aspiration to embrace what might be possible rather than what was probable. And this led to an aspired reinterpretation, reimagination, and re-inhabitation of the city. Now, this re-inhabitation of the city was a key focus, while development plans for the city at the time promoted an exodus to the suburbs. Paul Keogh, pictured here with John Toomey and Sheila O'Donnell, talks about how he and his colleagues were influenced by Aldo Rossi's writings and work, his 1966 The Architecture of the City being a seminal text. They collectively organized an exhibition of Rossi's work in the Blue Studio in May 1983, and this is captured in this photo taken from O'Donnell and Toomey's Instagram. Another significant influence was architectural historian Colin Rowe, whom Derek Tynan studied under in Cornell University. Like Aldo Rossi, Rowe presented a study of the traditional city and explored the layered evolution of contemporary cities against a backdrop of classical theory. So this was in effect a rejection of modernist ideals. In practical terms, this contextual approach to urban development promoted by Rowe was embraced by Group 91, who sought to introduce contemporary elements into the historic urban setting of Temple Bar while retaining the existing fabric. In the period leading up to the Temple Bar competition, Group 91 staged an architectural exhibition, Making a Modern Street, a model of which is pictured here, which tested new ideas for urban living on a street in the Liberties area of Dublin. The proposals were intended to be provocative, to ignite debate, and bring focus to the plight of Dublin's neglected inner city streets. Many of the members of Group 91 were also involved in teaching. And prior to this, several had participated in the UCD Dublin City Quays project and symposium in 1985, where they examined sections of the city along the River Liffey with students in the School of Architecture and made proposals, some quite radical, for urban interventions. Derek Tynan recounts how Group 91 were the new kids on the block, hungry for work. They exhibited their Making a Modern Street proposals for the Liberties in May 1991, and they won the Temple Bar competition in the autumn of that same year. So back to the Temple Bar competition. And just before I discuss this, I want to just draw your attention to the orientation of the map. And the framework plan drawings by Group 91 were flipped. So south is up the page. So you can see the Liffey is shown below Temple Bar area. So just so you're aware of that as I'm running through drawings. So Group 91's framework plan for Temple Bar encapsulated many of the ideologies and theories that had been explored in their collective design projects and exhibitions during the 1980s. So in this regard, they were poised to tackle the challenging brief to reclaim Temple Bar. Central to their vision was the establishment of a community of 3,000 citizens living in the city, and that's written there in the center of their plan. And the proposals within their strategy reflected this desire to re-inhabit the city centre. So this is a constant theme throughout the projects and throughout their work, while also placing an emphasis on conservation and renewal. So a series of meandering pedestrian routes underpinned the Group 91 framework plan, and many of them and the kind of ideas are shown here in these beautiful drawings. And, you know, many of the drawings throughout, and I'm going to be showing you a good few of them, are really, it's a very beautiful collection of work and just very evocative. I suppose they're creating quite an atmosphere. and conveying this kind of aspiration to kind of bring life back to this derelict part of the city. So these routes were designed to open up new streets and hidden spaces within what were predominantly derelict urban blocks. Now, the prize, and this is another sketch by Rachel Chidlow, and it's off Temple Bar Square, just showing you the kind of the life in the drawings. So the prize for the Temple Bar competition was to be a significant commission involving the design of a series of public spaces. And you can see in this drawing a series of spaces that they had drawn up and ideas that they had about how these would connect through these pedestrian routes. So following that, negotiations were begun to determine the exact scope of works within Group 91, but also between Group 91 and Temple Bar Properties and various government representatives. So finally, it was agreed that the first phase was to include 3 cultural clusters within the framework plan, one of which was Meeting House Square, which we will come back to. Once this was determined, Temple Bar Properties set about acquiring the relevant properties. And rather dramatically, on the 31st of July, 1992, 20 planning applications for schemes within the Group 91 framework plan were lodged to Dublin Corporation on behalf of Temple Bar Properties. So the first project I want to touch upon is O'Donnell and Toomey's Irish Film Centre, now the IFI. So though the IFI, which was commissioned in 1986, predates the Group 91 Temple Bar framework plan, it encompasses many of the ideals and principles that were integral to the collaborative scheme. Most importantly, the respect for historic context, as evident in the adaptation of the existing structures on the site. The film centre was, in many senses, a pilot project for the regeneration of Temple Bar as a cultural quarter. So the aspiration to create a cultural cluster, as we mentioned, was fulfilled with the later addition of the Irish Film Archive, the Photographic Gallery, the Photographic Archive, the ARC Children's Centre, and the Gaiety School of Acting, all of which connect to Meeting House Square, and we'll look at them in a little moment. So just some background to the IFI Commission. So the National Film Institute, now the Irish Film Institute, the IFI, was established in 1943. So in 1986, a film centre was proposed in Temple Bar to house the IFI. The brief, which evolved in the early stages of the project, was to provide a building that would accommodate various aspects of film culture. It was to include 2 cinemas, a film archive, a bookshop, a restaurant, a bar, education rooms, and film production offices. The Irish Film Institute was to be located in the former Quaker Meeting House and School. So it was embedded within an urban block, as we can see here in this Group 91 drawing, and it was bound by Eustace Street to the east and by Sycamore Street to the west. So this is the IFI building here. The site comprised a collection of 9 buildings ranging in quality and scale and dating from as early as 1692, loosely assembled around a covered yard. The architects adopted an archaeological methodology in the initial stages of brief development and design. They carried out a meticulous survey of the existing fabric in an effort to understand the layered history of the site. The design intention was to regenerate the layers within the complex block while retaining as much original fabric as possible and introducing new elements to connect the various fragments. The process began with an understanding that their contribution to this collection of historic buildings was merely another phase in its evolution. Referring to the brief and design concept for the project, O'Donnell and Toomey described their intention to extend the public realm of the city into the centre of the urban block. And this is very much the essence of the project. The film centre has no conspicuous street presence. You can see here the building is announced by a simple neon light and is accessed by a series of narrow laneways which cut through the block and lead the visitor to the central atrium. And just to highlight here a couple of the principal entrance from Eustace Street here, and a secondary entrance from Dame Street leading north. And then there's an entrance or an exit to the west to Sycamore Street, and then the kind of I suppose the entrance or the connection to Meeting House Square. So there were kind of 4 ways in. Now I know 2 of them are no longer, or they're retained for services, but that was the spirit of the scheme. So the block is essentially turned inside out. So the primary public gathering space becomes internal instead of serving the street. And this is it here. The interior spaces become an extension of the surrounding streetscape, in essence, a route through the block. And the inner court assumes the qualities of a lively public square. So this careful manipulation of existing fabric and sensitive insertion of new material, it results in a rich and complex spatial experience. So O'Donnell and Toomey have created a social hub that is crisscrossed by a series of urban paths, effectively a secret urban room. This permeability of the block, breaking down the block, is key to the project and ties into the ethos of the later work by Group 91 in Temple Bar. So the decision to locate the principal cinema in the former men's meeting room, and you can see the principal cinema there, Quaker Meeting House, and the second cinema in the former women's meeting room underpinned the design of the complex. And this allowed them to retain these important rooms. The central atrium space was formed on the footprint of the historic courtyard. And an inserted wall, gently curved like a lens, creates the southern edge of the space, and you can see that here, extending into the former schoolroom to form the bar and contain the restaurant gallery at first floor level. So this smooth ochre element is presented as a contemporary element, and it's set against the historic fabric. And these are some colour studies by O'Donnell and Toomey when they were at the design stage. So the palette of materials, I mean, the external qualities of the atrium space are accentuated by the industrial glazed roof, the limestone steel floor, and the weathered brick facades of the surrounding buildings. The palette of materials, stone, steel, brick, plaster, reflects the modest character of the surrounding Temple Bar streets and warehouse buildings. John Toomey recounts his delight on seeing a no bicycle sign posted on the wall of the foyer, an implication that the space was perceived as an extension of the streetscape, which was exactly their intention. The cinemas, by contrast, have the intimacy of a private room. The cast iron gallery overlooking the men's meeting room, which you can see in the archive photo to the left there, was sacrificed in the design process, but the upper level doors were retained in their entirety. The floating classical door cases present a surreal composition within the main cinema space. So you can see that the insertions here are quite minimal and that the character of the historic building is referenced and retained. The atrium space is clearly theatrical, invoking a sense of performance which indulges the public desire to see and to be seen, as shown here at the 1992 opening. In a critique in The Irish Architect on completion of the centre in 1992, Sean O'Leary likens the scenario to that of a Fellini film and notes the Cinecittà parallels, Cine, cinema, and città, city, the rare and magical blend of film and cityscape that is found within the walls of the film centre. In 1988, O'Donnell and Toomey won the AAI Downes Medal for the unbuilt design of the Irish Film Centre, which was an unusual fate. So as I mentioned, the routes through the IFI lead us north to Meeting House Square, which was designed by Paul Keogh Architects as part of the Group 91 framework plan. In their framework plan, Group 91 outlined their intentions for the new square, a sketch of which is shown here. A tourist information centre on a square lined with cafes, both meeting houses refurbished, a space for meetings, for indoor and outdoor cinema, theatrical performances, a civic scaled foyer to the surrounding cinemas and theatres, projecting glass canopies, a passage to Crampton Court, a dramatic new bridge at the mouth of the Poddle. Meeting House Square is named after the Presbyterian meeting house on Eustace Street, now the Ark, which dates from 1728, and the former 19th century Quaker meeting house, which housed the IFI, which we've just looked at. So Meeting House Square, shown here, was intended to serve as an outdoor room, an open-air performance space, formed by key cultural buildings around its perimeter. It's situated along the east-west axis through Temple Bar, so you can see here along Essex Street East. And a series of secondary pedestrian routes were planned to converge on the space, rendering the square a gathering point within the cultural cluster that we mentioned. There were aspirations within the plan for continuing route west to Crampton Court, linking the square with the Olympia Theatre and Project Arts Centre, but this was never realised. So that you can see the beginnings of that route crossways here that would have connected into Crampton Court and obviously connecting from the new curved street. And this is a little sketch of the north-south link, which is part of the plan. So I suppose another key influence at the time was architect and theorist Leon Creer. And central to Creer's postmodernist design theory was a requirement for an in-depth analysis of the historic city. So we've mentioned this analysis of the city, but also this appropriation of public spaces as rooms within the city, referencing the scale and the proportion of historic urban space. So this was something, I suppose it was a way of being respectful of the historic city. And this became a pivotal strategy within the Group 91 approach. So rather than assuming a tabula rasa approach to the design, the architect was reliant on existing forms and historic precedent. And we've seen this in the case of the IFI. So the form of the square obviously was dictated by existing, but also insertions that were new and contemporary. And this, I suppose, this kind of signified a change in the role of architect in urban design, which is quite interesting at the time. So Paul Keogh recalls trips to Europe as a studio tutor in UCD School of Architecture, in particular a trip to Barcelona, where the contemporary urban interventions and elegant public spaces made a distinct impression on him. He cites Bach and Mara's work as a particular influence, and there's a drawing by Bach and Mara shown here. Meeting House Square, measuring 750 meters squared, is laid out in Wicklow granite with sections of limestone inlaid to trace the intended east-west route that we just looked at through it. Now, I should mention that the images we have are of Meeting House Square as it is, and some changes were made in 2011 to mark the 20th anniversary of Group 91 and of the framework plan. And it also involved the design of these 4 giant retractable umbrella canopies. And this was all designed by Sean Harrington. So 4 trees punctuate the west edge of the square and provide screening for the seating area outside the cafe. The design of the space was developed by Paul Keogh Architects in consultation with the various architects. So Shane O'Toole and Merlo Kelly, who designed the Ark, Sheila O'Donnell and John Toomey, who designed the gallery of photography and the photographic archive, and of course the IFI. And the Gaiety School, which was part of a multi-use building, was designed by Paul Keogh Architects. And the presentation of the square as a room was dependent on a conversation between the various buildings, each of which had a very particular aesthetic and character. The palette of materials presented to the square in the facades is various: red brick, Portland stone, granite, limestone, render, steel, copper, zinc, and glass. The square was intended for public outdoor performances, as I mentioned, film screenings, music recitals, and the enclosing buildings were specifically designed to serve this function. So films were projected from the film archive onto the gallery of photography, which we see here. But also we have encased in a copper-clad proscenium arch, as you can see here, Santiago Calatrava's elaborate theatre curtain forms a centerpiece within the red brick facade of the arc. This folding metal screen opens up to reveal a stage while forming a sheltering curved canopy. So you can see it opening up there. And a drawing of the arc. And a series of drawings examining the kind of relationship of the buildings. And these are O'Donnell and Toomey's two buildings showing the projection of film. And some studies of the paving and the square. And there's various iterations, and you can see the process, the design process, which is very interesting in the archive drawings, and various versions of the square and the layout. Roving oak and steel wheelbarrow benches were designed by Paul Q Architects for public use within the space. Comprising seating on 2 levels, the benches were fitted with cast iron wheels to allow them to be moved around the square as required. And just a mention of the beautifully designed entrance from Eustace Street, the archway into the square, which was designed by Shane O'Toole, Michael Kelly, and Susan Cogan, who are part of Group 91. And it was given the AAI first ever special award in 1999. And it's a very beautiful insertion into a historic building, number 11 Eustace Street. So it's important to note that the creation of a square was envisioned all of these squares, but it was envisioned as part of a new urban sequence from Temple Bar Square and the curved street through the square and on to Essex Street East. So it was part of this east-west route. And you can see that in the sketch to the left, and kind of more formalized the north-south route shown in O'Donnell Toomey's drawing to the right. So a north-south route cut through the Irish Film Centre, as we looked at, through a historic laneway connecting Dame Street to the Liffey. McGarry Niani's Wibbly Wobbly Bridge, or Poddle Bridge, a pedestrian footbridge at the mouth of the Poddle River, was designed to continue this route across to the North Quays, bringing footfall through Meeting House Square. But alas, this never materialised. Now, the omission of this bridge and the construction of the Millennium Bridge on access with Eustace Street means that the flow of pedestrian traffic from Dame Street bypasses Meeting House Square. So without this footfall, the square lacks passive surveillance. And since 1996, the square has been locked at night, allegedly for security reasons, following reports of antisocial behaviour. Many would argue that this is contrary to the spirit of the Temple Bar Framework Plan, and that it has fundamentally changed the nature of the square as a shared civic space. The proliferation of bars in the area has also played a role, obviously. So Meeting House Square and the buildings enclosing it received a number of accolades in the 1997 AAI Awards, and 3 urban spaces in Temple Bar, Meeting House Square, Curved Street, and Temple Bar Square received a special mention. So moving on to the Printworks. And the Printworks development by Derek Tynan Architects is a collection of 10 apartments embedded within a historic block along Essex Street East and Temple Lane South. Temple Lane was formerly called Dirty Lane, and the historic block within which the Printworks is located originally stretched south to Dame Street. In 1995, a new street, Curved Street, which we've mentioned, and that's Curved Street there, was constructed through the block as part of the framework plan. Now, a ramped street designed to connect Curved Street to the printworks and through the block was also part of the strategy, and that's the street there. So this is the printworks here along Essex Street East and Temple Lane. And this ramped lane was designed to connect to Curved Street. But this remained an enclosed route within McCullum Ulvan's Music Centre, which is situated along Curved Street here. So this particular route didn't come about. So the site was that of the former two-storey Curtis Printworks, shown here, a 1930s structure which was reclaimed as part of the scheme. So retail units line the street along the north boundary to Essex Street East, you can see here, and studios and offices address Temple Lane. So the commercial units form a podium, creating a presence at street level, while the residential accommodation occupies a private world above. Now you can see here that a narrow double height slot, this is it here. So this is the printworks, and this building was refurbished as part of it. So this little narrow slot signals the entrance to the complex and gives way to a narrow staircase leading to a raised internal court. And this is the court shown here. So all the apartments are accessed from this upper court, this datum, which was designed as a shared landscaped space. So in addition to the hollowing out of this interior of a block to form this central court, a series of private, smaller open spaces serve each of the apartments. So it's very carefully considered in that regard. The selection of materials reinforces this separation between the inner world and the street. So along the principal elevation to Essex Street East, which we just saw, there's a red brick skin, and it references the neighbouring buildings, the historic street of Temple Bar. Whereas in the upper court, which we see here, the aesthetic shifts, borrowing an industrial language and a material palette from the former printworks, concrete, steel, zinc. And the apartments overlooking the shared court are expressed as white volumes. So a very clean language, which are prized apart to accommodate staircases and terraces. So it kind of, the scale is broken down by the insertion of these staircases and in these little separate garden terraces that I mentioned. So it reduces the kind of the bulk. The sawtooth roof profiles, which we can see here, allowing light in to the upper levels, and the vertical stairs, they lend a rhythm to the composition. So they, as I said, they break down the scale and introduce this rhythm. And a very clever section. So a section basically slicing right through the block we see here. It allows the upper levels of the block to benefit from light and privacy. And it creates this intimate space internally. So if we can see here, this is a cut through the inner court here, and this is Temple Lane here. And so this court is far removed from the kind of, I suppose you could say, the chaos of Temple Bar below. So the staggered facades to the east along Temple Lane allow private balconies to overlook the street. And that's, you can see these here, these stepped balconies that are kind of allowing private space inside, and then little balconies overlooking the street. So this layering or stacking of units is resolved with very clever interventions, allowing light to the rear of the commercial spaces. So the commercial spaces all occupy the ground floor, the street level, and you've got these clever devices to allow light in through the court and through these little windows and openings to the spaces below. And this space here was originally John Roche's studio, with a little duplex apartment above, and the stairs bring you up to that. And this is just an image of John Roche's studio, so the light is flooding into the back of it, which would have been potentially a very dark space. So it's quite cleverly done in that regard. It's also very evident in this beautiful model. So you can see again, probably more clearly than the section, that this is the internal court here with the apartments wrapped around it. Now we're cutting out right through one of the duplex up above. And then this is John Rush's studio here, lining up onto the street and accessing the street. So again, urban renewal, re-inhabitation were central to the ethos of this printwork scheme in a part of the city where vacancy and dereliction was prevalent. And one thing to mention is the living over the shop scheme was introduced as part of the 1994 budget, offering tax incentives for building owners to include residential accommodation on floors above shops on certain designated streets. And in an essay, Living Over the Shop, Frank MacDonald cites the printworks as a model for contemporary urban development. The printworks was awarded the AAI Downs Medal in 1995 and the RIAI Silver Medal for Housing 1994 to 96. The project was also shortlisted for the Mies van der Rohe European Architectural Award. So that concludes the lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to future discussions about the development of Temple Bar. Thank you.